Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for coming into the 2019 AGM by webinar session 2. This is Yuki Yasu at the Secretariat. We will wait for a few more minutes, just 2 minutes, while the attendees are logging in. So we will start in a few minutes. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining the AGM by webinar session 2. This is Yuki Yasu of the Secretariat. I think we will just wait for 1 more minute as I see a lot of people still joining this webinar. So for those who have joined on time, thank you very much. And if you can hold for 1 more minute, thank you. Okay, Tony, is it okay for us to start now?
Yes, go ahead. Yes, Yuki, thank you very much.
Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, once again. Welcome to the 2019 AGM by webinar session 2. So before we start, just a housekeeping information. Please note that your audio are muted. And if you would like to ask any questions, please use the chat function on the webinar platform, or alternatively, email me yuki.yasui@un.org, please. And this session, session 2 of the 2019 AGM by webinar, is chaired by Tony Balabriga of BBVA, who is the co-chair of UNEP Finance Global Steering Committee.
Well, yes.
Sorry, I'll just show the AGM by webinar agenda and explain about, so we will have 5 agenda items for today's session. And I will just explain about what this AGM by webinar is and what it isn't, and then hand it over to Tony to start the AGM by webinar. Thank you. So what the AGM by webinar is it is a briefing and a discussion concerning the administrative and governance issues within the AGM. We have 5 voting items, and we will go through all of them today at the AGM by webinar, and voting is opened at the end of this webinar, and you can already vote online. What this AGM by webinar isn't about is that it does not replace the AGM in person that we will be having on the 29th of November during the regional roundtable in Europe, which will be held in Luxembourg. So again, if you do have any questions, please use the chat function or email me during and after the webinar. Thank you. So I will now pass on to Tony to open this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yuki. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. First of all, let me give a warm welcome to the new members of this community of UNEP FI. So some of you, we are going to be more than happy in the next in-person meeting in Luxembourg to meet you and to know you personally. So a few hours ago, as Jackie mentioned, we have had the session chaired by Jackie Johnson, who co-chairs this global steering committee. And I would like to make a brief introduction first, reminding that we have to give a special thanks to two members that left the global steering committee the last month. So Hale and also Frank Horka, who has been working at the global steering committee last year. So and then also I would like to congratulate the extraordinary work done by the Secretariat, by the industry committees. So I think that what we have shared with Jackie also this morning is that there are some milestones that show the impressive work done by the UNEP FI community in the last year. I would like to highlight some of them. The first one is the launch of the Principles for Responsible Banking on the 22nd of September in New York, with the assistance of the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. We do know that these principles are the framework that we have defined together with the banking community of what does it mean to be a sustainable and a responsible bank. Today we have 133 banks committed with the principles from 49 countries, representing practically 1/3 of the banking system worldwide. So we have to congratulate the work done by the banking committee and for all the banks involved in this process. And it is a great milestone for this year. Also, this year we have launched the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Initiative, linked to the principles of sustainable insurance, the guide to ESG in insurance underwriting. And also we have complete the fiduciary duty project. And finally, let's remark the 4 regional roundtables that have been already implemented in different regions of the world. So I think now Eric could provide more detail of these key milestones for this year. So I give the floor to Eric to give further information. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you very much, Tony, and hello everyone also from the Secretariat. As Tony has relayed, certainly it's been a very busy year, particularly in the lead up to the launches in New York. The Principles for Responsible Banking, I think, highlight several years of work amongst the membership, and it's a very ambitious framework, and essentially I think stretches everyone involved to squarely position sustainable development, essentially society's needs, as a strategic issue across all lines of business. Now the signatories themselves certainly have a lot to do, and within the Secretariat, we're preparing the systems of support that will require from us for implementation. Meanwhile, we also have a lot of other things going on. Similar to the Principle 1 of the PRB, the banking principles, the main focus of UN Secretary General Guterres' climate summit held in New York in September was aligning economies and businesses with the Paris Agreement objective, which essentially means aiming towards total decarbonization, especially in developed economies by or before 2050. UNEP FI, we're very pleased to be working with the Principles for Responsible Investment, the PRI, in supporting the launch of the UN Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, which was announced by Oliver Bette, the CEO of Allianz Group, and involves Swiss Re, Zurich, CalPERS, CDC, and a whole number of other asset owners who are targeting for net zero by 2050. Including some very specific milestones, which they will announce next year for starting in 2025. As Tony mentioned, also on the investment agenda, we've finished up a 4-year program on clarifying fiduciary duties. We've also initiated a new program on aligning fiduciary duties with sustainability objectives, the notion of impact. Does that fit within one's fiduciary duties? We've been contributing to the EU action plan, and particularly its green taxonomy development, which seems reasonably likely to get enacted by the end of this year or early in 2020. As many of you will be aware, the new commission coming into Brussels is even more putting a higher emphasis even on climate action and sustainability broadly, so lots happening there. This mostly has been an investor-focused development, but recently we have started a project for our banking members looking at how the taxonomy might be used on the credit side of financial activity in Europe. On insurance, Tony already had mentioned some of the work that's been underway, particularly the global guide for non-life insurance underwriting on integrating ESG considerations. We've also been developing the PSI life and health insurance workstream and a number of other activities. In terms of climate, again, although the Paris alignment is new, the notion of net zero, by far the biggest area of work that we are undertaking with members is on climate disclosure, and that's in implementing the TCFD guidelines. And we have had investor pilots who launched their Changing Course report, which nicely had a forward from Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney. We have the insurance pilot work, which is now underway. We also have the second phase of the of the banking pilot underway. And at the end of the month in Luxembourg, the property working group will release their real estate report on TCFD. In the area of ecosystems, we've been finishing up a 4-year program examining natural capital, including the release last year of the Encore tool, which looks at natural capital dependencies and including how to integrate natural capital loss, for example, drought or the loss of pollinators, like bee pollination, what impact that has on credit risk analysis across different sectors. Tony mentioned that this year, 2019, is the year where we have regional roundtables. We've had 5. The last one will be in Luxembourg. Before that, we've been in Cairo, Shanghai, New York, and Sao Paulo. Next year in 2020 is a year where we have one large global meeting, the Global Roundtable, and that will be in Mexico City. The date will be announced very shortly. It is expected to be in mid-October. So that's about it. Overall, certainly a very busy year. Member engagement is, I would say, higher than ever. We've had good member growth, which I'll also speak about in a moment. But overall, good activity and definitely lots to do. Thanks. Back to you, Tony.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. A great summary. And as you said, another key achievement on this year is the impressive increase of membership. So I think it's important to highlight this on the following slide. So go ahead with this, please.
Can we have the following slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so as of the end of September, our membership has risen to 289 members across all 3 industries. Actually, as of today, I can say that we actually received our 300th member, but we record September to September. So we are in a growth phase. Last year, this was a 22% growth. The year prior was a 10% growth. So we've grown by a third in just 2 years' time. On the right in the pie chart, you see the composition of the membership. It's roughly 2/3 banking and 1/3 split between insurance and investment. And this certainly puts us in a good position. The growth has certainly been in banking linked to the PRB, but not only. We've also seen growth both in investment and in insurance.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Let's go to the following slide, please. So now it's time to, well, first to see if there is any question or feedback regarding this summary of the activity of the last year that was summarized by Eric. I don't know, Yuki, if we are receiving any comment or any question.
No questions or comments yet, but please do use the chat function and the question functions of the GoToWebinar. Alternatively, if you are dialing in by phone, please email me, yuki.yasui@un.org, throughout the webinar and also after the webinar as well. So
Yes.
no questions at the moment.
Okay. Then, so also to remind that you have this first voting item on the agenda, which is the summary record from the last AGM in 2018. So it is on the appendix 1. So let's remind that you have time from now on till the 28th of November to vote on these items. So let's remind that you have this possibility, obviously. So I think we should move. If we don't have any specific questions, we can move now to the second item of the agenda, which is the UNEP 5 governance framework revision. The proposal that has been defined and will be presented by Eric. It's a summary of updated governance that is being proposed. We think that is a key topic that must be covered in this AGM. It is very relevant because, well, the things are evolving very, very quick, and we thought that at the Secretariat and obviously at the GSC that it makes sense to make this proposal to all members in order to update the governance to the new trends that we have as a community. You know? So please, Eric, if you could summarize this proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. The actual governance framework document is attached as Appendix 2, which you can find on the internet. You see here where that is, although you've probably already gone in there. What I will show are the 5 changes in the document. If we can go to the next slide, please. So the first of the proposed changes is that, as many of you will be aware, when you joined UNEP FI, you signed up to a statement of commitment by financial institutions on sustainable development. Historically, that has been the signing document. However, with the putting in place of the Principles of Responsible Banking, now we have 3 principal signature documents: the PRI for investment, the PSI for insurance, and the PRB for banking. And based on which the GSC has felt that there wasn't need to also be signing a more general statement of commitment. So the proposal is actually to put that to sleep, if I could say, and to rather reformulate the basis of this statement of commitment into a vision statement, which is a non-signing statement. It's more of a part of the constitution documents. It's a very simple one, as you see here on the page. UNEP FI's vision is to create a financial sector that positively impacts and serves people and planet. So that's the first of the proposed changes. If we could go to the next slide, please. The second change has to do how the AGMs are organized, and specifically how voting items are put forward. The proposal, the current setup is that all members meet together in the AGM and all members vote on all items which impact, well, anything related to UNEP FI. Everyone has a vote. The proposed action here is to have that we have one AGM, but within the AGM, the 3 industries individually can meet together if they so desire, and more specifically, they can put forward votes which are open only to their industry. So as you see in item 2B here, there will be 2 types of votes. The first type, which is open to all members on issues affecting the entire membership, and the second type would be votes only open to members of a given industry on issues specific to that industry. In 2C, we see a description of the reformulated AGM responsibilities, which are not so different from currently in terms of the mandate to approve strategic, structural, and/or operational changes in the initiative, to approve the general membership fee, 2 years in advance, and the general budget for the following year, and then to settle any disputes which could not be resolved within the lower level governance bodies. If we could go to the next slide, please. And here we see the three more proposed changes. Item 3 has to do with the role of the 3 industry committees for banking, insurance, and investment when they hold their meetings in terms of their mandate to develop the industry work plans and the industry level budgets, to ensure consultation with industry members, and the potential for, if justified where needed, a potential fee supplement for that specific industry if there's some level of support that's required that is not provided to the general membership. Item 4 has to do with the thematic and regional advisory groups. Previously, these were termed boards. The proposal is to change the title to groups because these are not non-decision-making bodies. Essentially, these are subcommittees of the governance bodies that cut across and try to provide cohesion across the membership on issues like climate change. And to explain how these bodies would work, if we take the example of climate change, there would be a climate change thematic advisory group that would be composed of members of all 3 industry committees and the Global Steering Committee who are specifically interested to focus on the climate work. They would meet occasionally, mostly virtually, to discuss the UNEP climate change program, and then that would feed into any approvals within the industry committees as part of the climate discussion on that program. Currently, there are thematic seats on the industry committees. Those would no longer exist, but rather this could potentially involve a number of more members because, for instance, on climate, there's a lot more than one person on the banking committee, for instance, who wants to take part in the climate discussions, and the same for the other thematic areas. The regional advisory groups are similar in terms of they are a subcommittee. If I can take the example of the African Regional Advisory Group, any African or anyone coming from an African institution who is sitting on any of the 4 governance bodies could join the Africa discussion. And then once again, approvals would actually be within the industry committees, for instance, the banking committee. The only difference with the thematics is there still will be dedicated seats to ensure that we have proper regional representation on the 3 industry committees. So there still will be an African, European, Latin American, North American, and Asian seats on the banking committee. But for instance, the African advisory group could also potentially involve others on those committees, not only those sitting within those seats. So I'm sorry, this is quite a bit of detail. A lot of this is refining and building on the structure that's in place to improve further the effectiveness of these bodies. And finally, in item 5, there is some simplifying of the text that you will see if you go through the details within the document to try to make it more clear in its use and interpretation. That's it for the changes. Tony, back to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Eric, for this summary of these 5 main points of the update on the governance structure. And well, now it's time to see if we have any question or comment. I don't know, Yoki, if we have any specific question coming.
Yeah. So for now, we don't have any questions in the chat box or in the questions box, and I haven't received any emails yet either.
Okay. Anyway, if we receive any specific question about this topic during the rest of the session, we try to wrap up at the end, okay? And let's remind that this is the second item to vote, and then the full information is on the appendix 2. So this is how we should proceed. And so I think now it's time to move on the following item of the agenda, Yuki. So now we are going to discuss financials. In this case, we have three voting items. The first one is the 2018 financial report, which is the voting item number 3. We have then the interim report of 2019 with the budget for next year, the proposal for the budget for next year, which is the voting item number 4. And then we are going to cover as well the proposed 2021 membership fees, which is the voting item number 5. So now I will ask again to Eric to make a presentation of these financial discussions, and in this one we are going later to remind these three voting items. Thank you, Eric.
Eric, before you start, we received one question from the questions box. So Zana Nishwait is asking, please share some activity that take place within the advisory groups.
Okay, so Tony, can I speak to that for a moment first?
Yeah, yes, obviously. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. So I would say further to my example earlier on the thematic advisory group for climate change, let's say, the climate change work is taking place across all three industries. And for those who are not aware, we do have a matrix structure in the Secretariat. So we have the three industries, which are the main governance bodies, but we do have 4 cross-cutting thematic programs, which are climate change, ecosystems and land use, social issues, and this new area of positive impact finance. For each one of those thematic cross-cutting programs, we have a coordinator. And so some of you may know Remco Fisher leads a team on climate change related activities. And he is working in all three industries on issues, as I mentioned, TCFD disclosure, this new area of Paris alignment, science-based targets, and a whole range of other activities. He'll also shortly, he's one of the people having to deal with helping move the COP from Santiago in Chile to Madrid in terms of activities for the membership related to the climate negotiations. So the thematic advisory group for climate change would be the subcommittee of governance representatives from the 3 industry committees or the global steering committee, who basically are working with Remco on the overall climate program. So in terms of discussing priorities, issues, particularly of a cross-cutting nature, but obviously a lot of the issues are relevant across all the industries. So that would be an example of how that committee would work. As I mentioned, climate change activities would then be one element of the banking committee's deliberation, and the same for the other industries, and therefore formal decisions would be still taken within the industry committee, but the people who would have already fed into that through this thematic advisory group would then be in a proper position to essentially put forward and discuss with the other members of the industry committees to come to formal decisions. I hope that's a sufficient explanation of what these thematic advisory groups will be doing.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric, for the explanation. And Yuki, if we don't have any additional question, now we would move forward to the financial discussions. So go ahead, Eric. Okay.
Thank you, Tony. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so in this first slide, we see the 2018 financial report in terms of the breakdown of income, which was 5.1 million US dollars. And from the chart, we see that roughly half of our income comes from the annual member contributions. And then the other half comes from some from the members in terms of specific project activities, TCFD and the PRB development being the big ones in 2018 and 19. And then additional funding coming from some government donors, from some philanthropics, and that's for specific projects, and also some coming from UNEP itself. If we could go to the next slide. So on the expense side, we see the breakdown for 2018, and I'll explain it's $4.1 million, and I'll explain the difference in a moment. And then you see that the expenses covers the core operations, set of umbrella activities, thematics, and then some specific to industries. This shows both the expenses coming from paid for by the member contributions and also by sponsored activities of the sort that I mentioned earlier. If we could go to the next slide, please. So what we see here is a trend overview from 2018, which are the actual numbers, a forecast for 2019 based on our being 3/4 of the way through the year, and then a budget proposal for 2020. If you look at the top number, we see the trend in, as we said, we have member growth, and that has also led to an increase in member contributions, which has increased about, where we are projecting about a 50% increase over the 3-year period. We also have a small contribution income on the training and member sponsorships. That's only recognized when agreements are signed, and therefore in 2020 those numbers are not yet entered. Therefore our expectation is the actual income will be higher for 2020 than what's shown. Once again, in terms of sponsorships, we're only showing what's already fully confirmed. On the expense side, the top line, we also, in a similar sense to the growing membership, we do also have growing personnel costs, which are roughly in line with the member growth. We also have other activities which are growing to some extent. With the member growth, we do have some extra budget in 2020 projected, which will provide more funding back to the specific industries for allocation as per the industry committee decisions. We also, as mentioned earlier, we have a number of sponsored activities which need to be paid for on the expense side. And in terms of our overheads, we also see them growing similarly. So that provides total expenses, which in 2018 are $1,080,000 less than income. However, as shown on the slide, note a large part of that is actually a carry forward of income. This was particularly, once again, TCFD and PRB contributions from members, which were paid in 2017 and carried forward into 18. Paid in 18 to be carried forward into 19. Yes. And we also okay, so that's the 3-year trend, excuse me. If we could go to the next slide, please. Now, this slide is for those who want to understand in detail the certified financial statement, which you will have found in the annex, and specifically explains why some of the numbers are different from our normal budget. And largely the differences are because of UN accounting, which when we receive monies from, for instance, from a government to pay for a project, I mentioned we had a 4-year project. It was funded by the Swiss government for ecosystems work. When we receive such funding, the income is recognized the year the document is signed and is not spread out over the years where it's used. In the same way, if we subcontract, which we did in that project, $2.7 million was subcontracted to our partner, Global Canopy in the UK, to do the work. Once again, when we sign that contract, the expense is recognized all in that year, even if the work operates over several years. So what that does is that form of accounting creates much larger incomes and losses in certain years when those amounts are recognized. And so you'll see, and I won't go into details here, but we welcome to follow up with any member who's interested. There are some notes here to explain exactly what projects led to increased income recognition or increased expenses in certain years, and that's why it's kind of created an overall bumpiness, if I could say, within the financial statement. If we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so now I'd like to speak a little bit about the 2020 proposed budget. We have this funnel here shows from across our membership how much is coming in terms of member annual contributions. And as we said earlier, we have about 2/3 of the membership, which is banking. And then about 21% is insurance and 12% investment. Together, you're contributing about a $3.7 million core budget. We also have, as mentioned, some specific sponsored activities, and that some of that comes from members. A lot of it comes from others, from governments and foundations. We're projecting at this point about $1.9 million of sponsored activities next year. Of that, $100,000 is taken to cover admin costs, which gets added to our core budget. And then we also have projected about $542,000, which actually goes to offset some of our core costs. So it actually reduces the cost to the membership. For instance, I mentioned our thematic activities. A lot of our thematic team is actually paid for through these separate projects. But now on the next slide, I'd like to explain how this $3.7 million is proposed to be spent. Okay, so what we see here at the top is what I've mentioned, this core budget of $3.7 million US dollars. And then this is allocated in the orange boxes to a set of common costs. On the left, you see HR for the three industries to pay for the core staff for each of the three industries. In the second box, we see the core thematic team. As I'd mentioned, the thematic coordinators. It's quite a bit of a smaller number because, as I mentioned, a lot of their costs are actually paid for by these additional sponsorship amounts. We have the regional coordination team, and then we have some universal costs related to signatory relations, communications, governance support, etc. And finally, management and operations, including rent, IT, etc. So this is the common costs, so the common skeleton of the membership to support the members. And then at the bottom, we see, as I mentioned earlier, that there is some budget remaining, which is roughly about $400,000, which is then allocated across the three industries in a way that's reflective of the size of the membership. And then finally, at the bottom, you see that there is a decision proposal to create a working capital, to increase the working capital buffer, which to improve the efficiency in terms of how we can operate, in terms of contracting also for forward costs. If we could go to the next slide. Okay, so this shows the top funnel is the one you've already seen earlier in terms of incoming membership fees from across the membership. And then the bottom funnel shows an approximation of how the resources goes out to the industries. And to explain how this works, if I take banking as an example, that $2.196 million represents the funding going for the banking team, the banking additional budget, which you saw on the earlier slide, and a share of the overall secretariat costs based on the size of the membership. So essentially 2/3 of the regional coordination costs are allocated to banking because that's 2/3 of the members. So the assumption is a regional coordinator spends 2/3 of their time with banks and 1/3 with the mix of insurers and investors. So based on that approximation, you see the rough allocation out to the industries. And the one thing you will note, there is a small cross-subsidization from banking to the other two industries. And there's been a lot of discussion around that, and generally most of the responses are supportive around the notion that there's value essentially in working across all three industries, and there's an understanding, because banking is so much larger, that there's some logic essentially in having this small cross-subsidization, and banking also gets value back from having investors involved, insurers, etc. But we just try to be fully transparent so there's an understanding in terms of how the allocation is made and on what basis. If we could now go to the next slide. This shows our, as we mentioned earlier, growth in membership. This is our projection in terms of fees, which we expect to, as mentioned earlier, to grow about 50% over a 3-year period. And then the final slide, and this is the final voting item under the finance element, looks at the proposed 2021 membership fees. What you see in the blue column is what you've already been invoiced for 2020. And on the right, the Global Steering Committee has taken a decision. For a number of years, the fee was increasing 3% per year, and now the decision was to reduce that down to a 2% fee increase. So that would produce in Swiss francs these 4 fee levels that you see. In the bottom, you then see an income simulation for 2021, which takes the prior year estimated income, and then in red, the 2% fee increase that generates an additional $78,000. Most of the fee increase, most of the income increase will actually come from membership growth, which we now projected 8%, and together that produces a projected 2021 income just over $4 million, or a 10% increase. I believe that is the last slide on finance. So Tony, back to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Eric, for this complete explanation. Well, now it's time also to see if we have received any question or comment regarding the financials. I don't know, Yuki, if we have any comment.
Yes, Tony. So there has been one person who used the raise hand function, but because I cannot unmute, Basida, could you please put your question on the question box, and then we will be able to answer. Thank you.
Okay. Well, meanwhile, only to remind you that we have here these 3 voting items. So the financial report of last year, 2018. The fourth voting item is the interim report of the 2019 and the budget for proposal for 2020. And the 5th voting item is the proposed 2021 membership fees. So these are the 3 voting items that you should vote next days. And well, I think that's everything. So let's see if we have received, Yuki, the question. If not, we could move on and see if we finally get the question later.
Yeah, so we are still waiting for the question to be posed, so maybe we will carry on, and then if Basid, if you can add your question to the question box, we will be able to get back to you further in the webinar. Thank you.
No problem. We have the session, the whole session to answer back all the questions. So now it's time to move to the 4th topic of the agenda for today, which is provide you a brief summary of the European Regional Roundtable that is going to take place in Luxembourg, together with the in-person AGM. So in this case, I will pass on Liesel, who is going to share with us the latest update. Thank you, Liesel.
Tony and Liesel, sorry, this is Yuki again. So Basid has posed her question. It's actually relating to the regional advisory group. So the question is, could there be a bit more explanation on the regional advisory group? Thank you.
Tony, would you like me to respond?
Yes, please, Eric. Yes.
Okay, so let me, first in terms of the composition of the regional advisory groups, currently is the case, and this would remain the case, that there will be seats for each region where we have a minimum of 5 members on the industry committees. So for banking, we have seats for all 5 regions. For insurance, I believe we have it for 4 regions, and for investment for 3 regions. So when elections to those industry committees are made, when the seats come open, it's only members from that industry, from that region, who can nominate. So that will produce regional representatives on the 3 committees. However, as mentioned earlier, the regional advisory groups could be composed of more members, because other members sitting on these 4 governance bodies who come from a region are also invited to join regional deliberations as well, along with those who are sitting within the regional seats. Now, similar to the thematic groups that I mentioned earlier, for every region we have a regional coordinator. And so once again, that coordinator will be responsible for managing those advisory groups in terms of preparing the documents and discussing with them to develop the sub-strategies in their regions in terms of the activities taken on a regional level. And one of the examples would be in a year where we have regional roundtables, the discussions about where the roundtables will be, what the agendas will be, etc. And then once more, the formal decision making would actually happen within the industry committees. But these cross-cutting regional bodies are more basically to get an overall discussion and agreement in terms of what UNEP FI is doing collectively, I would say, within specific regions. I hope that's sufficient information to answer the question.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much, Eric. So if we haven't received any additional questions, Yuki, we can move on the following item.
Yes, I think we can move on.
Okay.
Basidio says thank you.
So next topic is the summary of the next European Regional Roundtable, as I said, and the in-person meeting at the AGM in Luxembourg. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Tony. Taliso Van Ast here at the Secretariat. The Regional Roundtable is the 5th of this year, and so we've had in Asia, Africa and the Middle East, North America and Latin America and the Caribbean last month. So as with the other regional roundtables, this one will really have a focus on the regional context. And in Europe, that means that we'll have a look at the EU Action Plan for Sustainable Finance, which is really driving forward the landscape for sustainable finance to accelerate in Europe. And not only we'll look not only at what's happening now, but what's coming up in Europe, because we understand that there will be a lot more ambition going forwards in sustainable finance in the policy and regulatory sphere. We'll also look at market developments and leadership and issues on the horizon in market practice, what banks, insurers and investors are doing across Europe. Some of this was touched on earlier in Eric's update. The principles for responsible banking, principles for sustainable insurance will of course be on the agenda, along with the climate commitments that asset owners have made and banks have made collectively to really drive towards a 1.5 degree pathway on climate change. Other topics: sustainable blue economy, digitization of green bonds, human trafficking, modern slavery, and many more on the agenda. If you look at the website, there will be more information. So we're really looking at what is happening now and what's coming up in sustainable finance across the region. We'll be featuring many of our members in the region who are involved in leadership activities and providing a platform to really showcase what is good practice and what's coming up in the space. One of the agenda items will be a PSI market event. That will be almost a day event with our insurance lead, Butch Makani, looking much more in a deep dive into the insurance industry in Europe and developments there. We also have TCFD workshops, which are for members only, and that's really for members who are involved in the pilot projects on insurance and banking to test implementation of the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure recommendations. These are just some of the highlights. There's a lot more, and we have over 600 people registered to join, so we hope to see you there. And the AGM in person will be taking place on the 29th of November in Luxembourg at the round table. So Yuki, would you like to give more details about that?
Yes, thank you. So the next slide, please. So we will be holding, as Liesl said, the AGM in person on the 29th of November during the regional roundtable in Europe. It will be early in the morning, 8:20 to 9:30. It would be a very short one, but we would be welcoming new members and looking at the substantive programmatic parts of UNEP FI during the AGM in person. The registration would be part of the European Regional Roundtable. There is no extra registration required to attend the AGM. And the agenda is already uploaded on the 2019 AGM webpage, which is in your extranet. So if you click the link, you might be prompted with a password, which would be UNEPFI in small letters. If there's any questions, please do contact me by email. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liesl and Yuki. I don't know if we have received any question regarding this latest topic or regarding the other topics covered today. Yuki, is there any other question?
No, other than to say that Vanessa Otto has emailed to say thank you for the transparency in the financial accounts. Great,
perfect. Thank you very much for the feedback. And now let's move on to the closing of this AGM by webinar. So let's make a final remarks, Yuki, please.
Yes, thank you, Tony. So the next slide, please. So we have, through this AGM by webinar, covered all the voting items for this year's AGM, and the votes are accepted from today until the day of the AGM, which will be on the 29th of November. Please do vote online in advance. Even if you are coming to the AGM in person, it will help the Secretariat immensely. So if you could vote now, and if there are any questions, please do get in touch with me by email, and we will clarify any questions that you need clarified before you vote. So please vote now and until the AGM in person. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Yuki. I don't know if there is any other topic to be covered or any question that could be raised through the system.
So I can't see any questions in the chat box at the moment.
Okay. So, well, to conclude the session and the AGM, I will give again a special welcome, warm welcome to all new members that are attending today. It's a great pleasure to be part of a growing community to promote sustainable finance. Congratulate the Secretariat of the work done last year, and especially considering the huge challenge that we have in front of us, and giving more voice to UNEP FI. I encourage really to vote all these 5 items. All are very relevant, but I would highlight the second one, which is about the update of the governance. This is absolutely a key topic, so take your time to check everything and vote, please. And finally, well, thank you for attending today. We will be more than happy to meet you in person in Luxembourg. I hope you will meet everyone there. And that's all. Thank you very much, and see you in Luxembourg.
Thank you very much, Tony. Just one last question that I got from Catalina. Says, hello,
Okay.
Where can we see a record of this AGM? So this AGM has been recorded, and we can put this up on the AGM webpage. Can you move up the slide, Mr. Fro, to go back to the AGM webpage? One more. Yes. So if you can visit the 2019 AGM webpage, we will put the recording up on this webpage. Thank you, Catalina. And I think we can now close this session. Thank you very much, Tony, for chairing this webinar. And thanks for all the panelists who spoke. So thank you for participating. And I hope everyone can come to Luxembourg for the AGM in person and the European Regional Roundtable. Thank you. We will close this session now.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.